Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how to use the Excel functions VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, and index match. These three functions can all be used to look up values from a table, and data analysts will often use these functions for Excel modeling and report building. VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, and index match are all pretty similar, but it's really helpful to know how to use each one because there's a time and a place for all three. So let me show you how to use all three, and then I'll explain when you should use each one over the others. Let's start with VLOOKUP. Out of the three functions that I'm going to show you today, VLOOKUP is probably the most common because it's been around the longest, so naturally, this is the function that Excel users tend to default to. Alright, so I have my sample data set. This is a list of tornado occurrences in 2022 in each US state by season. And this is just a sample data set that I created, so it's not actually historically accurate. And let's say we want to build a simple tool that will show us how many tornadoes occurred in each season at the selected state. So to use VLOOKUP, I'm going to first click into the cell where I want the answer to be displayed. And I'm going to type equals VLOOKUP. And Excel shows us this little dialog box that will tell us exactly what we need to input into the function. Each of these inputs is called an argument. The first argument is the lookup value. And that's going to be the criteria that we are using for this function. In other words, the lookup value is what we already know. Well, we already know what state we're looking up. That's the criteria that we're using for this function. So I'm just going to select the cell where I've already typed my state. Now, instead of selecting this cell, I could just manually type in Arkansas in quotation marks. But by referencing the cell where Arkansas is already typed in, I'm creating an Excel tool. So once I finish writing my function, I could delete Arkansas from this state cell and type in any other state, and I will then get the correct data for the state that I've chosen. Add a comma, and moving on to the second argument, which is table array. The table array is the table where our data is stored. So I'm going to come back to my raw data, and I'm going to select the entire table of data, including the column headers. Add a comma. And the third argument is the column index number, which is the number of the column where we want to look for the data. So we're looking for data about winter. And if we go back to our raw data, the winter column is in column 1, 2. It's the second column in our table. So in my function, I'm going to type 2. Add a comma. And our fourth and final argument is the range lookup. And for this argument, we can either type true or false. True is an approximate match and false is an exact match. I don't want an approximate match, I want the exact match, so I'm just going to type false. Now I'll just close my parentheses and hit enter. And there we go. Our cell has populated with the number of tornado occurrences in winter in Arkansas. And that is how you use VLOOKUP. It's pretty simple, but XLOOKUP is even simpler. For XLOOKUP, we only have 3 arguments. The arguments in brackets are optional, and we're not going to need to use those today. We're just going to use the first 3. The first argument in XLOOKUP is the same as the first argument in VLOOKUP, which is lookup value. So just like with VLOOKUP, I'm going to select the cell where I already typed my state. Again, I could just manually type in Arkansas in quotation marks, but referencing the cell allows me to later on go back to the cell and change the state that I'm looking for, and the data will automatically repopulate with the data for the correct state. My second argument is lookup array, which is the column where I want to find my lookup value. My lookup value is Arkansas, which is in column A. So I'm just going to select the entire column A. And selecting the entire column just ensures that if I add more data to my raw data table, it will be accounted for in my function. Add a comma. And lastly, the third argument is return array. This is sort of like column index number in VLOOKUP, except instead of typing the number of the column where we want to look for the data, we're just going to select the column. So since we're looking for data about winter, I'm going to select the entire column B. And again, selecting the entire column just ensures that if I add more data to my table, it will be accounted for in the function. Now just close your parentheses and hit enter. So XLOOKUP is definitely the preferred method over VLOOKUP because it only has 3 arguments and it's much easier to remember. Also, XLOOKUP allows you to look for values to the right or the left of the column. With VLOOKUP, you can only look for values to the right of the column. So if you wanted to look for values to the left of your column, you would have to completely rearrange your table. So I definitely recommend XLOOKUP over VLOOKUP. But if you're using an older version of Excel, you may not have XLOOKUP, but you may not want to use VLOOKUP because, like I mentioned before, you can't look for values to the left of your column. So the third option is index match. Index match is actually two functions. It's the match function nested inside of the index function. To use index match, we're going to start with the index function. The first argument in index is array, which is the table where our data is stored without the column headers. So I'm going to come back to my raw data tab and I'm going to select the entire table where the data is stored without the column headers. Add a comma. And the next argument is row number. This is where we're going to use the match function. Remember that index match is essentially the match function nested inside the index function. So for the row number, I'm going to type in match, open parentheses, which starts the match function. The first argument in the match function is lookup value. And just like with VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP, this is going to be the value that we want to look up. So again, I'm just going to click the cell where Arkansas is already typed out, add a comma, and the next argument is going to be lookup array, which is the column where I want to find my lookup value. My lookup value is Arkansas, which is in the state column. So I'm just going to select all of my states without the column header, add a comma, and the last argument in the match function is match type. We have three options here. We can choose an exact match, or we can choose less than or greater than. I want an exact match, so I'm going to type in 0. For index match, you will pretty much always just use an exact match. Now I'm just going to close my parentheses, which finishes off the match function, but we have one more argument left for our index function. So I'm going to add a comma, and the last argument in the index function is the column number, which, just like with VLOOKUP, is the number of the column where we want to look for the data. So we're looking for data about winter. So we're looking in the winter column, which is in column 1, 2. So I'll type in 2. Now just close your parentheses and hit enter. And that is how you use index match. So in my opinion, index match is the least convenient because it has 6 arguments, so it can be a little confusing. So I think you should always try to use XLOOKUP first. It's the easiest and most efficient, and it allows you to look to both directions of your column. If you have an older version of Excel and you can't use XLOOKUP, then I would recommend using index match as your second option because even though it takes a bit longer, it does allow you to look to both directions of your column. And lastly, if you really don't want to use index match or you know that you'll only be looking for values to the right of your column, then VLOOKUP can be sort of a last resort. So I hope this tutorial was helpful and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more.